Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're venturing into Medellin, Colombia, as of April 2025, to confront a really critical and complex issue,
Uh,
human trafficking.
It really is. And it's a tough reality to face, especially in a city that's, reinvented itself so dramatically.
Right.
Medellin went from being infamous for the drug trade back in the 90s to, well, a huge tourist destination. We're talking 1.4 million visitors in 2023 alone.
Massive shift.
Huge. But that transformation, positive in so many ways, has unfortunately brought this other shadow, this rise in human trafficking.
Exactly. And it's not just one thing, is it? We're seeing different kinds of exploitation popping up all over the city.
Mm.
Like sexual exploitation connected to nightlife in places like Eras Park, but also these really disturbing stories about forced labor along the Bogota-Medellin highway.
Yeah, and what's worrying is how much likely goes unreported. There's so much fear and, frankly, a lack of trust in the authorities sometimes.
So a lot of it stays hidden.
Precisely. Our goal here with this deep dive is to really try and get beneath that surface, understand what's actually happening right now.
What victims are going through.
Yes, their experiences, but also the underlying factors that let this happen, and crucially, what's being done now to fight it. It's about getting a clearer picture than just the headlines.
And that's where you, our listener, come in. We've structured this deep dive to give you a really comprehensive but hopefully digestible understanding of this whole tangled issue.
We want to peel back the layers.
Okay, let's dive in then. Human trafficking in Medellin. It
And
touches so many different lives.
It really does. What's striking is just how broad it is. It's not just one group being targeted. Women, men, children, they're all vulnerable.
And the official numbers, they don't tell the whole story, do they?
It's not even close, probably. The UN Office on Drugs and Crime, they estimate maybe 100 to 150 identified victims across Colombia each year. But like you said, the real number, likely much, much higher. So much underreporting.
Right. That official figure is just the tip of the iceberg, the cases that actually make it through the silence.
Exactly.
And one of the most, well, visible and disturbing aspects is the sexual exploitation side. It seems connected to Medellin's growing reputation, maybe unfortunately, as a sex tourism spot.
Yeah, that demand created by sex tourism, it definitely plays a role. It fuels the market, unfortunately, for exploiting vulnerable people. We've seen some absolutely shocking examples recently.
Truly horrifying. Just last year, 2024, right? There was that American man found with two girls, so young, 12 and 13, and then another tourist caught with a 12-year-old boy. These aren't just isolated cases, are they?
Sadly, no. And it raises serious questions about how this operates in busy areas like Eras Park. There are reports suggesting traffickers are even using dating apps now.
Dating apps. Wow.
Yeah, using them to find and exploit victims. It shows how these criminals adapt their methods, It's a really disturbing evolution.
And then you hear about places like the Caracolí service station out on the highway. The stories there are just almost unbelievable.
It's utterly devastating. Girls as young as 12 coerced into providing sexual services for maybe $5. $5.
It's hard to comprehend.
The most tragic part, sometimes it's their own families pushing them into it out of sheer desperation. That detail, it just stays with you. It shows the level of poverty and breakdown that exists.
It really does. And beyond the sexual exploitation, there's this whole other side, forced labor, which often hits people already on the margins.
Exactly. Migrant workers, people from disadvantaged communities, they're particularly susceptible. There was that heartbreaking case the U.S. State Department highlighted in 2023.
The young indigenous woman.
Yes. Forced into domestic servitude right there in Medellin. Locked in a room, trapped in debt bondage.
What exactly is debt bondage?
It's where someone is forced to work to pay off a supposed debt. But the terms are rigged so the debt basically never goes down. It's a trap. She was reportedly forced to work constantly, no rest, no pay. It just shows the cruelty involved.
It really brings home the human cost. And it's not just domestic work, right? You mentioned other sectors.
Right. Things like flower growing, coffee plantations, even mining operations in the region. There are concerns about underdressed forced labor in those areas, too.
And domestic servitude often overlaps with forced labor, particularly for women and girls coming from rural areas or migrant groups.
Yes, definitely. And the situation for Venezuelan migrants, that's particularly tough.
So many have come to cities like Medellin.
About 1.5 million since 2010. And finding decent work is incredibly hard for them. This lack of opportunity makes them extremely vulnerable. Some end up in exploitative domestic work or even pushed into prostitution just to survive.
It creates a fertile ground for exploitation, doesn't it?
Yep.
The sheer number of people, limited support.
Exactly. And getting accurate numbers on any of this is just so difficult.
Because of the fear.
Fear is huge, yes. Fear of traffickers, but also, sadly, sometimes a lack of trust in the authorities. Corruption is a real concern.
And that affects whether victims come forward for prosecution.
Absolutely. It's deeply concerning. Think about this. In 2023, across all of Colombia, only 4 victims participated in prosecutions. 4. Even though we know many more were identified in past years, especially transnational victims.
Wow, that says a lot about the climate of fear.
It really does. And Medellin isn't just a local issue spot, it's a hub for transnational trafficking too. People being moved not just within Colombia, but out to Europe, Asia, North America.
So when we talk about transnational trafficking, that's moving people across borders using force or deception.
Precisely. Recruitment, transport, harboring.
Yeah.
All across borders, all for exploitation.
So drilling down a bit, who is most at risk? We've touched on some groups.
Well, women and girls are definitely disproportionately affected, especially those from rural areas, indigenous communities, often targeted for sexual exploitation.
And other risk factors.
Being Afro-Colombian, a displaced Venezuelan, living in areas where armed groups are active, these all significantly increase the risk.
And children. They're a horribly significant part of this picture.
Tragically, yes. Around 12% of identified victims in Colombia are children. And Medellin is a major center for child sex trafficking. That Caracoli case, at least 39 underage girls involved there.
Just devastating. But it's not only women and children, right? Men are victims too.
Absolutely. Men and migrants are often victims of forced labor construction, farming, mining. It's important to remember that NGOs in Medellin helped 48 adult victims back in 2022. And that included men and LGBTQI plus individuals, often with international support.
Okay.
And again, Venezuelan migrants. Their lack of legal status and economic hardship makes them vulnerable right across the board.
So let's talk about the why. What are the underlying factors letting this persist in Medellin? What's feeding this terrible problem?
It's a mix of really deep-seated issues. Socioeconomic conditions are huge drivers, poverty, lack of jobs.
Right.
And while tourism brings money and jobs, which is good.
About 9.3% of the economy, right? And 90,000 jobs.
Exactly. But it can also inadvertently make things worse for vulnerable people. Desperation can make them take huge risks for what seems like an opportunity.
Like that story you mentioned earlier, Patricia, the 14-year-old at Caracoli, pushed into it by her own aunt just to support the family. That really hits home how poverty drives this.
It does. And when you combine that with poor education and few real job prospects in rural areas, those false promises of a better life in the city become incredibly tempting and incredibly dangerous.
Makes sense. And then there's the role of organized crime.
Oh, absolutely. A massive role. They use violence, threats, coercion.
Yeah.
It's brutal. These groups often have complex networks and use existing criminal structures.
Like Operation Vesta in 2018, that seemed like a huge bust.
It was a joint U.S.-Colombian effort in Medellin and Cartagena. They uncovered this massive network involved in trafficking, sex tourism, child exploitation, horrific stuff.
And wasn't a high-ranking naval officer involved?
Yes. Which just shows how deep the rot can go, the potential for corruption, even at high levels. 14 Colombians arrested, including the officer, plus 3 Israelis.
And it's not like that was the end of it.
Sadly, no. Just last year, 2024, they arrested a Cuban-Mexican guy in Medellin, leader of a ring trafficking Colombian women to Mexico. So these networks are still very much active, very adaptable.
Which brings us to law enforcement, or maybe the lack of it, and corruption.
That's a critical piece. Corruption basically creates a safer space for traffickers to operate. They fear less getting caught or facing real consequences.
And there was that case in 2023, 3 Medellin police officers.
Yes, apprehended for allegedly being part of a ring sending women to France for sexual exploitation. A stark, really troubling example of how corruption enables this.
It's incredibly concerning, especially when you hear that between 2010 and 2021, there were, 40 investigations into officials being complicit?
Right, and most of those just ended in disciplinary actions, not actual criminal convictions. That highlights a huge systemic challenge.
So the system isn't effectively rooting it out?
Not consistently. And add to that, a lack of proactive victim identification. If authorities aren't actively looking for signs of trafficking, especially among migrants or women in prostitution, victims just slip through the cracks.
And are there cultural factors too? Things that make it harder to address?
Yes, unfortunately. Foundation Renacer points to what they call strict sexist thought patterns, deeply ingrained attitudes that can normalize abuse, especially against young people, girls, and the LGBTQI+ community.
That's an uncomfortable but important point.
It is. And systemic barriers, too. Like the lack of standardized ways for officials to identify trafficking victims among vulnerable groups like displaced people. This can lead to victims being missed or worse, misidentified and even penalized.
Okay, so the challenges are immense. But despite all that, what's actually being done? What efforts are underway in Medellin right now, April 2025, to fight back?
Well, there are efforts on multiple fronts: prevention, protecting victims, prosecuting traffickers, and building partnerships.
Let's start with prevention. How do you stop it before it happens?
Raising awareness is key. Trying different approaches, like that UNODC and Ministry of Interior workshop in 2024 with the Misak indigenous community.
The one with the board game.
Exactly. Using a culturally relevant board game that's innovative, a thoughtful way to get the message across in a specific community context.
That sounds really smart.
And things like ongoing training for journalists that started way back in 2009, but continues to make sure reporting is more informed and sensitive.
And more current actions.
Well, during Semana Santa this year, 2025, the Antioquia Police and the mayor's office had an info stand right at the international airport, specifically warning about child sexual exploitation. Very direct, very current.
Okay, what about policy? Laws, regulations?
There have been some big moves, though sometimes controversial, like the 6-month ban on all prostitution in 2024.
Right, aimed at child exploitation.
That was the stated goal. But it got criticism too, people saying it didn't tackle the root causes like poverty and might just push exploitation further underground, make it harder to track.
Yeah, you can see how that might happen. Are there more targeted measures?
Yes, like the evening curfew just for minors in Yaris Park. That seems more focused on a specific hotspot with police checkpoints to enforce it.
And the mayor, Federico Gutierrez, he seems to be taking a strong stance.
He does. He's been very public about zero tolerance, saying Medellin is not a haven for criminals, and emphasizing cooperation with international bodies like Interpol. That sends a message.
What about educating young people directly?
That's crucial for long-term change. The Ministry of Education is integrating trafficking awareness into the sex ed curriculum in Medellin schools.
Good.
And NGOs like Valientes Colombia are doing vital work directly with at-risk youth. They helped a 16-year-old girl who was almost lured by a fake online job offer. That kind of intervention is critical.
So that leads to protection. If someone is trafficked, what happens then? What support is there?
Having specialized police units is absolutely vital for rescues. We saw that in 2024 with the arrest of El Mexicano at that big shopping center, Milla de Oro.
That was a joint operation.
Yes. And another one at the airport led to arresting a Peruvian guy exploiting minors in Medellin. Importantly, 8 victims were rescued in those operations and got immediate support.
That's good news. What about ongoing support, rehabilitation?
Organizations like Espacios de Mujer have been really adaptable. During COVID, they switched to online counseling, Skype, WhatsApp to keep helping survivors. They continue doing that vital work.
Impressive.
And in 2022, a couple of NGOs in Medellin managed to help almost 50 adult victims shelter, medical care, job training, partly thanks to international funding.
But you mentioned earlier gaps in services.
Yes, particularly dedicated shelters specifically for adult victims. That's still a major gap in the city. The government's interagency center refers victims to NGOs, but the dedicated adult shelter capacity just isn't there yet.
What about helping survivors rebuild their lives?
No.
Reintegration.
That's a key part. The government helps with safe transport home for victims. And there have been efforts, often with NGOs, to provide more comprehensive services. Vocational training, like Espacios de Mujer offers, is really important. Helping survivors get skills, maybe start a small business, find work, reduce their vulnerability long term.
Okay, let's shift to prosecution. Are those specialized police units making a difference in bringing traffickers to court?
It seems so. In 2023, they prosecuted 10 foreign nationals in Medellin for sexual exploitation, even though the crimes happened outside Colombia. That shows capacity for complex cases.
Right.
And Operation Vesta back in 2018, while older, led to 12 arrests and the rescue of 55 minors across several cities. The forensic work was key there, too.
And more recently?
That 2024 operation with Interpol, dismantling the ring trafficking women to Mexico, arresting the leader in Medellin, that's a clear prosecution success.
But despite these successes, there are still big legal hurdles.
Definitely. Colombia has Law 985, which criminalizes trafficking with serious prison time, 13 to 23 years. But enforcing it effectively in Medellin is still a challenge.
Conviction rates are low.
They hit a 10-year low in 2023. And prosecuting labor trafficking is especially rare. Apparently, the only conviction they had for that is currently under appeal.
And the corruption issue keeps coming up.
It does. 51 cases of official complicity allegedly sitting in the system in 2023, mostly ending in just administrative slaps on the wrist. It's a major barrier.
But maybe some signs of hope.
There are. There seems to be more political will now, better communication between the government and civil society groups. That's leading to stronger strategies being developed.
And international help is critical here.
Absolutely essential for transnational crime. Collaboration with partners like the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's HSI unit. They were involved in arrests like El Mexicano and provide training.
Right.
And that 2023 joint operation with Germany that nabbed a trafficker just highlights how crucial working across borders is.
So the final piece seems to be partnership, everyone working together.
Exactly. Government agencies, NGOs, they need to collaborate closely. Like that route against sexual exploitation and human trafficking launched in Cartagena in 2022 involving the Attorney General, UN agencies, child welfare, local NGOs like Renaissance Foundation. That's a good model.
And in Medellin?
We see the mayor's office working with the police and the U.S. Embassy's HSI unit on specific operations. That kind of practical collaboration is happening.
And involving the community itself.
Crucial for prevention and support. UNODC working with the MISAC community on culturally specific tools, like the board game, is great. And groups like Valientes Colombia working directly with families to challenge those harmful sexist norms and empower kids.
It's interesting how technology is also playing a part.
Yeah, trying to innovate. Colombia had its first anti-trafficking hackathon back in 2019, trying to spark tech solutions.
A hackathon, interesting.
Yeah, UNODC, IBM, Pasos Libres Foundation involved, trying to encourage tech startups and apps like LiberaDAP by Colombia Migration for reporting suspicious activity that exist, though making them truly accessible and widely used is still a challenge.
Okay, so lots of different efforts. Amidst all the challenges, are there clear success stories we can point to, things that show progress is possible?
Absolutely. It's important to highlight those. That 2014 rescue operation, HSI and Colombian authorities working together, they rescued 55 minors from sex trafficking rings in Medellin, Cartagena, Armenia.
55 minors.
Some as young as 11. Drugged, forced into prostitution. Awful. But they were rescued. 11 traffickers were arrested facing serious time, and the kids were placed with Bienestar Familiar, the child welfare agency. That's a tangible success.
A major intervention.
Definitely. And more recently, that 2024 bust of the transnational ringleader in Medellin, the one trafficking women to Mexico. That involved Interpol, showed strong international cooperation, and importantly, 8 victims were rescued and got immediate help.
And the individual stories matter too, don't they?
Immensely. Like the 16-year-old girl Valientes Colombia helped in 2021. She was targeted online with a fake job offer, realized it was likely for sexual exploitation, and had the courage to seek help.
That takes bravery.
It does. And getting that counseling and legal support empowered her, helped her avoid being victimized, and she even started raising awareness among her friends. That's a powerful outcome.
So there are successes. But let's be realistic, as of April 2025, significant hurdles remain.
Right. Oh, absolutely. We have to be clear about that. Despite the efforts, the challenges are still huge and deeply ingrained. Underreporting is still a massive problem. We just don't know the true scale because so many victims are too afraid or unable to come forward.
Still hampered by fear and lack of trust.
Exactly. And corruption. It keeps undermining enforcement. Those 51 official complicity cases pending in 2023 with few real consequences, that erodes trust and lets perpetrators off the hook.
And the gaps in services, particularly for adults and labor trafficking victims.
That's a critical failure point right now. The fact that maybe 95% of identified victims in 2022 didn't get the proper care they needed, that's staggering. It leaves people incredibly vulnerable.
And new challenges emerging too.
Yes. The rise of online exploitation, things like webcam services, that apparently increased by about 30% since the pandemic started. It's a whole new complex front in this fight.
So, looking ahead, what needs to happen? What are the key steps to really tackle these challenges?
Well, several things seem crucial. More funding, definitely, for victim services, especially for proper shelters for adult victims. The current situation is just not adequate.
Okay.
Stronger anti-corruption measures are vital. Really digging in, maybe learning from strategies used elsewhere, like in Cartagena, to ensure accountability within law enforcement and the justice system.
What about technology?
Need to make better use of it, expand things like reporting apps, make them more accessible, maybe explore how AI could help identify patterns or networks. Keep innovating.
And labor trafficking needs more focus.
Absolutely. There needs to be a much stronger push to investigate and prosecute labor trafficking cases specifically.
Yeah.
It's a huge part of the problem, often hidden, and perpetrators need to face consequences.
This has been, well, a sobering deep dive, but incredibly important. It's clear human trafficking in Medellin is this really complex, deep-rooted issue.
It is multifaceted.
But it's also clear there are dedicated people, organizations really pushing back, trying to make a difference, offering hope.
Exactly. We've seen the different forms it takes, the factors driving it, the poverty, the crime, but also the ongoing fight, the prevention efforts, the protection work, the prosecutions, the partnerships.
And it really feels like it comes down to a shared responsibility, doesn't it?
Completely. Tackling this needs action from everyone, government, NGOs, sure, but also communities, individuals. Everyone has a role to play.
Which brings us maybe to a final thought for our listeners to chew on.
Yep.
Considering how interconnected everything seems, tourism, poverty, organized crime, what are some of the less obvious leverage points? Where could we make a real, lasting difference in disrupting human trafficking in a city like Medellin? Are there overlooked solutions hidden in those complexities we've talked about?
That's a great question to leave people with. Thinking beyond the usual answers.
Absolutely. If you're interested in exploring this further, definitely check out the web IDs we mentioned. Look into human rights organizations working on this.
There's a lot more information out there.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. It's been really insightful.
Thank you. Important conversation to have.